Hey YouTube, it's Matt here. I'm going to talk today a little bit about how I got into collecting comics. I haven't always been a comic book collector, even though comics have been a part of my life for a long, long time. Alright, now to hear how it happened. Now, I always had comic books in my house. As I was growing up, I was always encouraged to read. I always had an adult or an older cousin or somebody who read to me all the time. Reading was so pushed in my household. And some of the reading was, hey, here's a comic book. And I had a lot of like comic books like Huey, Dewey, and Louie, and Bugs Bunny comic books, and those sort of comic books. Not so much the superheroes. I'm not saying I never saw a Batman here and there, but it was mainly the cartoon comic books. Honestly, I don't really know what happened to those comic books that I had when I was a kid. And there's none of them that I can actually remember vividly. Like, I really liked this one. Although, I absolutely did like the Shrimp People. With you guys are going to know what I'm talking about. It's the little advertisement in the back of a lot of books where you can supposedly buy these little sea people. And I always wanted to buy one of those, and my mother would never allow me. I just found out probably a few months ago, I was talking to my mother about this, and the reason she really never let me buy these back in the day is because her parents allowed her to buy those whenever she was a kid. And she said, yeah, they didn't work. Yeah, they grew, they swam around a little bit, but they were not sea people. They were just little brine shrimp. But anyhow, so fast forward a few years, and I've talked about this character so many times on my videos and on my Instagram. You know that I like Conan the Barbarian. I'm going to tell you how I got into Conan the Barbarian and other comic books, but if you guys have ever seen the Arnold Schwarzenegger Conan the Barbarian movie that came out in 1982, I was 6 years old whenever that movie came out, and I remember whenever it came out on HBO. I was allowed to watch that movie, and it absolutely blew my mind of just how epic and cool that was. The story from the get-go of how he was beaten down as a kid. You know, his family was wiped out, and he was on the wheel of pain, if you guys know what I'm talking about, where he had to just keep pushing it around, and you know how he grew big. Great story, okay? I really enjoyed it. I liked the movie from the get-go. Fast forward a couple years, and my mother, she comes to me and she goes, hey Matt, you know, do you want a comic book subscription? Now, at the time, if you guys have ever heard of Publishers Clearinghouse, I figured out my mother entered that one year, and in order to enter, you have to buy a couple magazine subscriptions. Well, she saw that she can get a comic book, and she decided to get me something, and I had choices. And some of the choices I remember were Spectacular Spider-Man, Uncanny X-Men. I almost went with Uncanny X-Men because I kind of thought the X-Men were cool. And some of you guys do too. And I still think the X-Men are cool. And Conan the Barbarian was another option. I'm sure there were a couple others. But whenever I heard Conan the Barbarian, I'm like, whoa, please, can I get the Conan the Barbarian comic book? And that's what I got. Honest to Pete, forgot all about it. Like a few months later. And keep in mind, I was 8 years old whenever I finally got a comic book. So my memory might not be the most vivid, but I remember it being so long between her asking me if I wanted a comic book and actually one showing up in the mail that at the time I'd forgot that she even asked me. So I'm positive it was quite a few months. And I remember my first issue. It was issue 160, Conan the Barbarian, issue 163. It had this incredible Ernie Chan cover. Now, I didn't know who Ernie Chan was at the time. I've since went back and seen who it was. But, hey, actually, hold on a second. I can pull that book up. Right here. I already had to get out of my chair. So I'm going to pull these out for, well, actually, we'll get out of my chair. 163, 183, 161, 162. I might as well pull the whole lot out. Oh, there we go. There we go. So, I have these books here. So, now I can show you these books that I had got. Now, 180, 100, forgive me, Conan the Barbarian 163 is what came in the mail. I was absolutely enthralled with that picture, and he looks like the classic barbarian in there. I read this story, honest to Pete, probably 20, 30 times that month. I read it over and over and over again. This is not the original book that I had. The original book that I had was just completely beat up. But then I went on and I read this one, 164, to me, these are all great stories, so I can't say another great story. They're all great. 165, 166, 167. I always thought this cover was cool. I mean, I like all these covers. In high school, in art class, I did an oil painting of this cover. And honestly, I'm so mad at the art teacher. Not mad. The art teacher was a great teacher. But the next year, I went to get my cover because she had it displayed in her room. And I wanted to get it to bring home. Well, she gave it to a student who needed some help buying a canvas. So they painted over top of my picture. But I still remember. Someday I might pull out the oil paints and do another cover of that. 169 was one. Now, starting in this era, there was a new writer, Jim Owsley, and sometimes he goes by the name Priest. Phenomenal writer, and he was writing a ongoing story in Conan the Barbarian. I loved the story. In fact, I still like it. It's still one of my favorite runs in comics. And my subscription ran out with issue 174, right in the middle of the story. And so, for years, I never finished this story. And my love for comic books kind of started in, and honestly, I would go, there was a pharmacy that was relatively close to my house that we would go shopping at frequently. And every now and then I would pick up a comic book. And if I had done some chores or done something, I could afford the 65 cents. And I remember one up to 75 cents. But that happened on and off throughout the rest of my childhood, but not very often. I wasn't what you would call a comic book collector, although I appreciated the medium. So fast forward to when I was a senior in high school. And I came across my stack of comic books, and they were beat up. I didn't have them bagged and boarded back then. They were in a stack. In fact, I found them in a box in my grandfather's attic. How they got to that point, I really don't know how they got there, but that's where I found them. So anyhow, I read the stories again. And I remember saying to somebody, I said, listen, I know they're comic books, because trust me, I wasn't a comic book collector at the time, but I said, I know they're comic books, but it is a really good story, and I would love to know how this story ends. Because this is pre-internet days, this is in the 90s, and there were no LCSs anywhere near me. Like, I had no idea how to get old comic books. It just wasn't a thing where I was living at the time. So, anyhow, I graduated high school, I go off, active duty Air Force, and believe it or not, I used to buy a comic book every now and then at different gas stations or whatever, convenience store. But after my tour in active duty, I was going to college. And I was helping my brother move while I was in college one day, not the whole time I was in college, but anyhow, one day I was helping my brother move. And he goes, hey Matt, I have all these comic books. Do you want these? Lo and behold, it was my stack of Conan the Barbarian from whenever I was 8 years old. And by this time, I'm probably 23, 24 years old. I reread these. And again, it captivated me. And my college roommate was a comic book collector. And I go to him, I'm like, buddy, this is a great story. And pretty much what I said to that other friend when I was a senior in high school. I'm like, how do I find these? And he's like, oh, dude, just go onto eBay and type Conan the Barbarian lot. A whole world exploded for me that I never knew existed. So I ended up finishing the story that was started way back when I was 8 years old. And I was blown away by the Conan the Barbarian story. And when I started, quote, collecting comics, I was not a comic book collector. I was a Conan the Barbarian collector. I just liked the story. I went around and I got any Conan story I could get, whether it was the original Robert E. Howard stories put in book format or the other books that were made later on. Conan comic books, I just enjoyed Conan, but I always liked Spider-Man too. And I'm going to go way back into my childhood again. Before I ever started kindergarten, I remember I couldn't wait for my big brother to get home from school, because him and we would sit and we would watch the old 1960s Spider-Man cartoon because it came on after the kids got out of school. And him and we would watch that and we enjoyed it. And there were other cartoons, but I was always a big Spider-Man fan. And then there was Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. And since I enjoyed all of these comic books that were Conan, I was like, I'm going to give Spider-Man a shot. So I started buying some Spider-Man comic books. I first bought some cheap reader copies off of eBay. And then, you know what? If you've ever started reading comics, you realize, hey, these are really, really awesome stories. And I started buying books. And then I kept reading books. And I'm a big reader. Like I said, it was always encouraged in my house. And then before you know it, I'm going from Spider-Man, and I'm doing Witchblade, and I'm doing Spawn. And here's some Spawn books here. And I have pretty much, I have Spawn, Medieval Spawn, Spawn the Impaler, Curse of Spawn. I have so many different Spawn runs. And it just went on. And Spider-Man, and I already told you I have Witchblade, but there was Darkness I would collect. Captain America I would collect. And then I started to branch out. And then I'd start collecting X-Men. I told you I always liked the X-Men. And then I'd look for other characters I like Blade. And guys, these comics, these drawers, these are filled with stories and different characters. But I can only display, 4 times 12. Okay, I can only display 48 different covers at one time. But I have thousands of comic books in here. And then there's other stories like Hard Time. I really enjoyed this thriller. It's about a boy who goes to prison way underage. But there's a lot of supernatural events into it. But I told you I had different spawns. And then it just kept morphing. And then I just really started to enjoy the medium. And then I had a child. And one of the ways that I encouraged my own child to read and always have literature into his life, I was buying him comic books. In fact, this set of drawers down here, this is my son's. And he collects comic books. He uses his allowance to buy different comic books. And trust me, I'll throw him a few bones here and there. And, I'll make sure that I pick him up some books because I always want to encourage him to read. But this whole drawer set down here is his. So comics are now definitely a part of my household. And I hope, honestly, that they always will be. My wife collects comics now. She's not the biggest collector, but she does enjoy her one series, Strangers in Paradise. She's like, I'm going to try reading some books, because whenever we started dating and she realized I was a comic book collector, she's like, what is this? What's in comics that made me want to read them and collect them? She realized, hey, these are actually really cool stories, because my wife is like me. She's constantly reading something. So even my wife collects. So this is kind of like a little family hobby here. Mainly I'm the main guy about it, but my wife and my son, and there's only the three of us in my immediate family, but all three of us really appreciate the medium. And then the art, I was started to become fascinated by the art. Some of my favorite comic books aren't even valuable. Like, I'll give you right here. I love the movies, Army of Darkness, and this is a Devil's Due book. And honestly, it's just such a goofy looking cool cover, and I love it. The book's probably not worth a whole lot, but it doesn't matter. It's about the stories and about the art, and that's pretty much, I'm going to wrap this up for today. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to put them down in the comments. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Make sure you give me a subscription. And everybody, thank you for watching.